The sound of shattering glass jolted me from my stupor. I stood frozen in the doorway of what used to be my kitchen, watching as Brenda, my mother-in-law, hurled another plate against the wall. "You useless, barren woman," she shrieked, her face contorted with rage. "Look what you've done to my son's life." I flinched as another plate whizzed past my ear. "Brenda, please," I pleaded, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is my home, too." She laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent chills down my spine. "Your home? Not anymore, Laura. You've overstayed your welcome." I searched the room desperately for Mike, my husband of 15 years. He stood in the corner, his face a mask of indifference. "Mike," I called out, "please say something." He met my gaze, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd married. But then his eyes hardened, and he turned away. "Maybe it's best if you leave for a while, Laura," he muttered. My world tilted on its axis. "Leave? But where would I go?" Brenda's triumphant cackle filled the air. "Oh, I'm sure you'll figure something out. After all, you've been so good at figuring out how to avoid giving my son children." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my stomach. The same stomach that had just 3 years ago carried our child for 6 precious months before tragedy struck. "That's not fair," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "You know that's not fair." But Brenda was on a roll now, circling me like a vulture. "What's not fair is how you've held my son back all these years. This business could have been thriving if he hadn't been saddled with you." I turned to Mike, silently begging him to defend me, to remember all we'd been through together. But he remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. A knock at the door startled us all. "Laura," a familiar voice called. "Are you okay in there?" Relief washed over me. "Helen," I breathed, grateful for my friend's impeccable timing. Brenda's eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare let that busybody in here," she hissed. But I was already moving, yanking open the door to reveal Helen's concerned face. "Oh, thank God," I murmured, pulling her inside. Helen took in the scene, the broken dishes, Brenda's red face, Mike's hunched shoulders, and her expression hardened. "What's going on here?" "Nothing that concerns you," Brenda snapped. "This is a family matter." Helen's arm went protectively around my shoulders. "Laura is my family," she said firmly. "And from what I can see, she needs me right now." I leaned into her embrace, drawing strength from her presence. "They want me to leave," I said, my voice cracking. Helen's grip tightened. "Leave? This is your home, Laura. You and Mike built this life together." "Built it on lies and disappointment," Brenda interjected. "It's time for my son to start fresh." I looked at Mike, searching for any sign of the man I'd fallen in love with. "Is that what you want?" I asked softly. "To start fresh without me?" He finally met my gaze, and the coldness in his eyes made me shiver. "I think it's for the best," he said, "at least for now." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Helen's arm was the only thing keeping me upright. "Then I'll go," I surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "But don't think for a second that this is over." As Helen led me toward the door, I caught a glimpse of something on the kitchen counter, a stack of papers I hadn't noticed before. My heart clenched as I recognized the letterhead of a local law firm. Divorce papers. They'd already drawn up divorce papers. I stumbled, the final betrayal threatening to overwhelm me. But as I looked back at Mike and Brenda, standing in the wreckage of what was once my happy home, a new emotion surged through me. Determination. This wasn't the end of my story, it was just the beginning. I sat on Helen's floral-patterned couch, staring at the divorce papers spread across her coffee table. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, each word a dagger to my heart. "I can't believe he did this behind my back," I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying. 15 years of marriage, and this is how it ends?" Helen squeezed my shoulder. "You don't have to sign anything, Laura. We'll fight this." A knock at the door made us both jump. Helen frowned, checking her watch. Who could that be at this hour? She opened the door, revealing a familiar face that made my stomach churn. Ryan Davis, Mike's right-hand man at the grocery store, stood on the porch looking uncomfortable. "Laura," he said, nodding at me, "I'm sorry to bother you, but there's something you need to know." I steeled myself, gesturing for him to come in. "What is it, Ryan?" He perched on the edge of an armchair, wringing his hands. "It's about the business and the divorce papers." My heart raced. "What about them?" Ryan took a deep breath. I overheard Brenda talking to Mike. She's been planning this for months, Laura. She convinced Mike to transfer most of the business assets to her name to protect them from the divorce settlement. The room spun. I gripped the arm of the couch to steady myself. That's not legal, is it? Helen, ever practical, was already reaching for her phone. We need to call a lawyer now. But Ryan wasn't finished. There's more. Brenda's been sabotaging the business, turning away loyal customers, mismanaging inventory. I think she's trying to run it into the ground. But why? I asked, bewildered. That business is Mike's whole life. Ryan's eyes met mine, filled with sympathy. I think she wants him completely dependent on her. If the business fails, he'll have nowhere else to turn. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about getting rid of me. Brenda was orchestrating Mike's entire downfall, all to keep him under her control. I have to warn him, I said, standing up. Helen grabbed my arm. Laura, think about this. After everything he's done. I know, I cut her off. But I can't just let Brenda destroy everything we've built, even if Mike and I are over. The drive to Mike's house felt surreal. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw him through the kitchen window, hunched over paperwork. My heart ached at the familiar sight. I knocked on the door, steeling myself. When Mike opened it, his eyes widened in surprise. Laura, what are you doing here? I pushed past him into the house. We need to talk, Mike. It's about the business. He ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted. Look, if this is about the divorce. It's not, I interrupted. Well, not entirely. Mike, Brenda's been. Don't start with that again, he snapped. My mother's been nothing but supportive. I laughed bitterly. Supportive? Is that what you call transferring business assets behind my back? Mike's face paled. How did you? It doesn't matter. What matters is that she's trying to ruin you, Mike. She's sabotaging the business, driving away customers. Can't you see what she's doing? For a moment, I saw doubt flicker in his eyes, but then his expression hardened. You're just trying to turn me against her, he said coldly. I think you should leave, Laura. I stood my ground. Not until you listen to me. Check the books, Mike. Talk to Ryan. You'll see I'm telling the truth. Ryan? Mike's eyes narrowed. What does he have to do with this? Before I could answer, a car door slammed outside. We both turned to see Brenda marching up the driveway, her face twisted with rage. What is she doing here? Brenda shrieked, bursting through the door. Mike, I told you not to let her back in this house. As Brenda advanced on me, eyes blazing, I realized with startling clarity that this confrontation was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. I stood in the cramped bedroom of Helen's guest room, staring at the meager collection of belongings I'd managed to salvage from my former life. The divorce papers lay on the nightstand, a constant reminder of the battle ahead. A soft knock on the door jolted me from my thoughts. Laura? Helen's voice called. There's someone here to see you. Curious, I made my way to the living room, only to find Ryan standing awkwardly by the fireplace. His presence sent a mix of emotions through me, gratitude for his help, but also a painful reminder of the life I'd lost. Ryan, I said, forcing a smile, what brings you here? He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Helen before meeting my eyes. I've got some news about the store. It's not good, Laura. My heart sank. What's happened? Ryan took a deep breath. Brenda's been making changes, big ones. She's fired 3 long-time employees, including old Mr. Jenkins. I gasped. Mr. Jenkins had been with the store since Mike's father owned it. She can't do that. She says she can, Ryan replied, his voice tight. And that's not all. She's canceling orders from local suppliers, trying to switch to cheaper, mass-produced stuff. The room spun. I sank onto the couch, my mind racing. But that'll destroy everything Mike's father built. The whole community relies on those connections. Helen sat beside me, her hand on my arm. Laura, maybe it's time to let this go? It's not your fight anymore. I shook my head vehemently. No, I can't. That store isn't just a business. It's the heart of this town. I won't let Brenda destroy it. Ryan cleared his throat. There's more. I overheard Brenda talking to her lawyer. She's trying to get Mike to sign over his remaining shares to her. If she succeeds, she'll have complete control, I finished, my voice barely above a whisper. The weight of the situation pressed down on me. I stood up, pacing the room. I need to do something. But what? Mike won't listen to me, and Brenda's got her claws in so deep. Helen's eyes lit up. What about the divorce papers? You haven't signed them yet. right? I nodded slowly, realization dawning. So technically, I'm still co-owner of the business. Ryan leaned forward, excitement in his voice. Exactly. You could challenge Brenda's decisions, maybe even stop the transfer of shares. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I need a lawyer, I said, determination filling my voice. Helen was already reaching for her phone. I know just the person, tough as nails and hates bullies. She'll eat Brenda for breakfast. As Helen made the call, I turned to Ryan. Thank you for telling me all this. I know it can't be easy, caught in the middle like this. He shrugged, a small smile on his face. The store means a lot to me too, Laura, and, well, you've always been kind to me. Unlike some people, he added, his expression darkening. I was about to respond when Helen's excited voice cut through the room. Laura, the lawyer can see you tomorrow morning. First thing. A surge of energy coursed through me. Perfect. Ryan, can you get me copies of the store's financial records? Anything that shows what Brenda's been doing? He nodded eagerly. I'll have them for you by tonight. As Ryan left, and Helen bustled about, making plans and muttering about, showing that what's what, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The pain of Mike's betrayal was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but now it was overshadowed by a fierce determination. I picked up the divorce papers, running my fingers over Mike's signature. For a moment, I saw us as we once were, young, in love, full of dreams for our future in the store. I'm sorry, Mike, I whispered, but I won't let her destroy everything we built, even if I have to fight you both to save it. With a deep breath, I set the papers down and turned to face Helen. All right, I said, my voice steady, let's get to work. We've got a battle to win. I stood outside Sherman's grocery, my heart pounding as I watched customers trickle out, their faces etched with disappointment. The store that had once been the pride of our town now looked shabby and neglected. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door, the familiar bell chime now sounding more like a death knell. Inside, the shelves were half empty, and what little produce remained looked wilted and sad. I caught sight of Ryan behind the counter, his face lighting up when he saw me. Laura, he said, relief evident in his voice. Thank God you're here. It's been a nightmare. Before I could respond, a shrill voice cut through the air. What is she doing here? Brenda emerged from the back office, her eyes narrowing as she spotted me. I thought I made it clear you're not welcome here anymore. I straightened my spine, meeting her gaze. I'm still co-owner of this business, Brenda, and from what I can see, it needs all the help it can get. She scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. We're doing just fine without your interference. Are you? I challenged, gesturing to the empty shelves. Because it looks to me like you're running this place into the ground. Brenda's face flushed with anger, but before she could retort, the bell chimed again. We all turned to see Mrs. Hawkins, one of our oldest and most loyal customers, enter the store. Oh, Laura, dear, she said, her face lighting up. It's so good to see you. I was hoping you might be back. I smiled warmly at her. It's good to see you too, Mrs. Hawkins. How can we help you today? She hesitated, glancing around the store. Well, I was hoping to get some of that lovely local honey you always stocked, and perhaps some fresh vegetables for my famous casserole. My heart sank as I realized we had neither. But before I could speak, Brenda jumped in. I'm afraid we've had to make some changes to our inventory, she said, her voice sickly sweet. But I'm sure we can find you some alternatives. Mrs. Hawkins frowned. Alternatives? But I've been buying the same products here for years. My Herald, God rest his soul, always said Sherman's was the best store in the county because of its local touch. I saw an opportunity and seized it. Mrs. Hawkins, I promise you we'll have your honey and fresh vegetables back in stock by next week. Won't we, Ryan? Ryan nodded eagerly, ignoring Brenda's glare. Absolutely. I'll make the calls myself. Mrs. Hawkins beamed. Oh, wonderful. I'll be sure to tell everyone at the senior center. We've all been so worried about the changes here. As she left, promising to return, Brenda rounded on me. How dare you? She hissed. You have no right to make promises about this store. I have every right, I shot back, and I won't stand by and watch you destroy everything Mike's family built. Mike agrees with my decisions, Brenda sneered. He knows what's best for the business. As if summoned by her words, the door opened again, and Mike walked in. He stopped short when he saw me, his face a mix of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. Laura, he said, his voice uncertain. What's going on? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. Mike, we need to talk about the store, about us, about everything. Brenda immediately latched onto his arm. Mike, darling, you don't have to listen to her. Remember what we discussed? But Mike's eyes were fixed on me, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the man I'd married. No, Mom, he said quietly. I think it's time I heard what Laura has to say. The tension in the room was palpable as Mike, Brenda, and I faced each other. I knew that whatever I said next would determine not just the fate of the store, but the course of all our lives. Taking a deep breath, I began to speak, my voice steady and determined. Mike, there's something you need to know about what's really been happening here. The tension in the store was suffocating as I laid out everything I knew about Brenda's machinations. Mike's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally, a dawning horror as the truth sank in. That's impossible, he stammered, looking between Brenda and me. Mom, tell her she's wrong. Brenda's face was a mask of indignation. Of course she's wrong. This is nothing but a desperate attempt to save her own skin. But I wasn't backing down. Ryan, I called out, show Mike the books. Ryan hesitated for a moment, then nodded, pulling out a stack of papers from under the counter. I'm sorry, Mr. Sherman, but Laura's telling the truth. I've been keeping track of all the changes and, well, see for yourself. Mike's hands shook as he flipped through the pages. I could see the moment reality hit him. His shoulders sagged, and he looked years older in an instant. How could you do this? He whispered, turning to Brenda. This store was Dad's legacy. Brenda's mask slipped, revealing a flash of panic before she regained her composure. Everything I've done has been for your own good, Mike. You needed to learn to stand on your own 2 feet, away from her influence. My influence. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. I've been gone for weeks, and look what's happened. The store's falling apart, Mike, and it's not because of me. Before Mike could respond, the door burst open. A group of angry-looking customers stormed in, led by Mr. Jenkins, the employee Brenda had fired. Sherman, Mr. Jenkins bellowed, we want answers. Half the town's talking about how you've run this place into the ground. The situation was spiraling out of control. I watched as Mike, overwhelmed, stumbled back against the counter. I don't understand, he muttered. How did it get this bad? Seizing the moment, I stepped forward. Everyone, please. I know you're upset, and you have every right to be, but yelling won't solve anything. Give us a chance to make this right. Mr. Jenkins narrowed his eyes. And how do you plan to do that, Laura? Last I heard, you weren't even part of this business anymore. I took a deep breath, aware that my next words could change everything. I'm still co-owner of this store, and I promise you, starting today, things are going to change. Brenda's shrill laugh cut through the air. Co-owner? Not for long, dear. Once those divorce papers are signed. I'm not signing them, I interrupted, my voice steady. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. In fact, I'm going to fight this divorce with everything I have. This store, this community, it's my home, and I won't let it be destroyed. Mike's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd fallen in love with, buried beneath years of his mother's manipulation. Laura, he said softly, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, I replied, but we need to act fast if we're going to save this business. Turning to the crowd, I continued, I'm asking for your trust and your patience. Give us 2 weeks. If we can't turn things around by then, well, I'll step aside for good. A murmur ran through the group. Finally, Mr. Jenkins spoke up. 2 weeks, Laura, not a day more. As the crowd dispersed, I felt a mix of relief and terror. What had I just committed to? Ryan approached, a tentative smile on his face. That was incredible, Laura, but how are we going to do this? I glanced at Mike, who was staring at the financial records with a lost expression, then at Brenda, whose face was twisted with barely contained rage. I don't know yet, I admitted, but I do know we can't do it alone. Ryan, start calling our old suppliers. See who we can win back. I'll reach out to Helen. We're going to need all the help we can get. As I turned to leave, Mike's voice stopped me. Laura, wait, I want to help, if you'll let me. I met his gaze, seeing a glimmer of the man I'd once known. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Okay, I nodded. Let's save our store. The past week had been a whirlwind of activity. Ryan and I had been working around the clock, reaching out to old suppliers, mending fences with disgruntled customers, and trying to breathe life back into Sherman's grocery. Mike had been helping too in his own hesitant way, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. I was restocking shelves when I heard the bell chime. Looking up, I saw Mike enter, his face etched with worry. "Laura," he said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." My heart sank. I'd been waiting for this moment, dreading it. "Okay," I replied, setting down the can I was holding. "What's on your mind?" Mike ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I remembered all too well. "It's about the business. The numbers. They're not adding up." I frowned. "What do you mean? Ryan and I have been going over the books every night." "That's just it," Mike said, his voice rising. "I've been looking at them too, and there are discrepancies, large ones, and they all seem to lead back to you." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "What, Mike? That's impossible. I would never." "Then explain this," he interrupted, pulling out a stack of papers. "These transactions, all made in the weeks after you left. Thousands of dollars, Laura. Where did it go?" I stared at the papers, my mind racing. I don't understand. I never made these transactions." Mike's eyes hardened. "Don't lie to me, Laura. Not now. Was this your plan all along? To bleed the business dry before the divorce?" The injustice of it all made my blood boil. "How dare you?" I hissed. "After everything I've done to save this store, how can you even think that? Because the evidence is right here," Mike shouted, waving the papers. "God, I was such a fool to trust you again." The store had gone silent, customers watching our confrontation with wide eyes. I could feel everything I'd worked for slipping away. "Mike," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, "think about this. Who else had access to the accounts? Who's been trying to sabotage this business from the start?" I saw the moment of doubt flicker across his face, quickly replaced by anger. "Don't you dare try to blame my mother for this. She's been nothing but supportive." "Supportive?" I laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call manipulating you into serving me divorce papers behind my back?" Mike froze. "What are you talking about?" With shaking hands, I reached into my bag and pulled out the divorce papers I'd been carrying with me. "These, Mike, the ones your mother had drawn up weeks ago without my knowledge, the ones you signed." The color drained from Mike's face as he stared at the papers. I never signed these." "What?" "Laura, I swear, I never signed these papers. I didn't even know they existed." The realization hit us both at the same time. "Brenda," we said in unison. Just then, the store's phone rang. Ryan answered it, his face growing pale as he listened. "Mike," he said, holding out the receiver. "It's the bank. They say there's been a large withdrawal from the business account. They need your authorization immediately." Mike lunged for the phone, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait," I said urgently. "Think about it. Who else has access to that account?" Understanding dawned in Mike's eyes, followed quickly by horror. Without another word, he bolted for the door, leaving me standing amidst the chaos of the store. My mind was reeling. Brenda had gone further than we'd ever imagined, forging signatures, embezzling money. But why? What was her endgame? As I watched Mike's retreating figure, I knew we were hurtling towards a confrontation that would change everything. The store, our marriage, our entire lives hung in the balance. Taking a deep breath, I turned to Ryan. "Call Helen," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Tell her to meet us at Mike's house. It's time to end this once and for all." My heart pounded as I raced towards Mike's house, Helen and Ryan close behind. The evening sky was darkening, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. As we pulled up, I saw Mike's car in the driveway, alongside Brenda's sleek sedan. "They're both here," I said, my voice tight with tension. Helen squeezed my shoulder. "We're right behind you, Laura. Whatever happens, we've got your back." Taking a deep breath, I marched up to the front door and threw it open without knocking. The sound of raised voices led us to the living room, where we found Mike and Brenda locked in a heated argument. "How could you do this?" Mike was shouting, his face red with anger. "Your own son." Brenda's eyes widened as she saw us enter. "What are they doing here?" she hissed. "This is a family matter." "We are family," I retorted, stepping forward, "and it's time for the truth, Brenda. All of it." Mike turned to me, his eyes wild with a mix of emotions. "Laura, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. The things she's done." Brenda's composure cracked. I did it all for you, Mike, to protect you from her. She jabbed a finger in my direction. She was going to ruin everything, just like she ruined your chance at having children. The room fell silent. I felt as if I'd been slapped. Is that what this is about? I whispered. Our miscarriage? Mike's face crumpled. Mom, how could you? That wasn't Laura's fault. It was no one's fault. But Brenda was beyond reason now. She took everything from you. Your future, your legacy. I had to do something. So you decided to destroy the business? Ryan interjected, his voice thick with disbelief. How does that help anyone? Brenda's laugh was borderline hysterical. The business? That was just the beginning. Once it was gone, Mike would have nothing left. He'd have to start over with me by his side, the way it should be. The realization of Brenda's plan hit me like a tidal wave. She hadn't just been trying to get rid of me, she'd been systematically dismantling Mike's entire life, all to keep him dependent on her. Mike staggered back as if physically struck. My God, he murmured, all these years, everything you've done. I stepped forward, placing myself between Mike and Brenda. It's over, Brenda. We have proof of everything. The forged signatures, the embezzlement. You can't talk your way out of this. For a moment, I thought she might lunge at me, but then something in her seemed to deflate. You'll never understand, she spat. A real mother would do anything for her child. No, Mike said, his voice stronger now. A real mother wouldn't destroy her child's life for her own selfish needs. Brenda's face contorted with rage. Selfish? I gave up everything for you, and this is how you repay me? She turned to me, eyes blazing. This is all your fault. You turned him against me. Before I could react, Brenda lunged forward, her hands outstretched as if to claw at my face. I stumbled backward, but Mike was faster. He stepped between us, catching his mother's wrists. That's enough, he roared. The authority in his voice seemed to shock even Brenda into silence. You're going to leave now, Mom, and you're never coming back. As Ryan and Helen moved to escort Brenda out, I watched the woman who had caused so much pain and destruction crumble before my eyes. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her. The slamming of the front door echoed through the house, leaving Mike and me alone in the sudden silence. We stood there, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on us. Finally, Mike turned to me, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. Laura, he whispered, I don't know if I can ever make this right, but I want to try, if you'll let me. I stared at him, my emotions a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and a tiny flicker of hope. As I opened my mouth to respond, I realized that this moment would define not just our future, but who I was going to be from this point forward. The choice was mine and mine alone. 6 months had passed since that fateful night when Brenda's web of lies unraveled. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my blazer, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at me. Today was my first day as a social worker, a path I never imagined I'd take. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Helen beaming at me. Ready for your big day? She asked, pulling me into a hug. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, my stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement. As we drove to the community center, Helen filled me in on the latest town gossip. Did you hear about Brenda? She asked hesitantly. I tensed. What about her? She's moved to Florida. Apparently she's not speaking to anyone from town anymore. I nodded, a mix of emotions washing over me. Brenda's actions had caused so much pain, but in a way they'd also set me free. And Mike? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Helen's expression softened. He's still trying to salvage the store. Ryan's been a big help. We pulled up to the community center, and I took a deep breath. This is it, I said, more to myself than Helen. You're going to be amazing, Helen assured me. Those people in there need someone like you, someone who understands what it's like to overcome adversity. As I walked into the building, my mind drifted back to the night everything changed. Mike's plea for a second chance had hung in the air between us, heavy with years of hurt and betrayal. In that moment, I'd made a choice, not just about our marriage, but about the woman I wanted to be. I can't go back, Mike, I'd told him, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. But maybe we can both move forward. The next few months had been a whirlwind of change. Mike and I had decided to separate, but amicably. We worked together to save the store, rebuilding trust not as husband and wife, but as business partners. And in the process, I discovered a strength in myself I never knew existed. Now, as I stood in front of my first group of clients, women who'd faced their own battles with manipulative relationships and shattered dreams, I felt a sense of purpose I'd never experienced before. "Welcome, everyone," I began, my voice stronger than I expected. "My name is Laura, and I'm here to help you navigate the challenges you're facing. But more than that, I'm here to remind you of the strength you have within yourselves." As I shared my story, the manipulation, the betrayal, the journey to self-discovery, I saw recognition in their eyes. These women understood, in a way no one else could, the courage it took to reclaim your life. "It's not easy," I told them, "but you are not alone, and you are so much stronger than you know." After the session, as I gathered my things, I noticed a familiar figure hovering in the doorway. Mike stood there looking uncertain. "Laura," he said softly, "I hope it's okay that I came. I wanted to see you in action." I felt a flutter in my chest, but it wasn't the ache of lost love. It was pride in myself, in how far I'd come. "Thank you for coming, Mike," I said sincerely. He smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "You're amazing, you know that? These women are lucky to have you." As we walked out together in comfortable silence between us, I realized something profound. The revenge I'd once craved against Brenda, against Mike, even against life itself for the hardships I'd faced, it had transformed into something far more powerful. I'd found my purpose, my strength, my voice. Standing in the warm afternoon sun, I turned to Mike. "I forgive you," I said, the words lifting a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying, "and I forgive myself too." Mike's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with understanding. "Thank you," he whispered. As we parted ways, Mike to the store, me to meet Helen for a celebratory dinner, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The journey had been painful, filled with betrayal and heartache, but it had led me here, to this moment, to this version of myself. I was Laura Collins, survivor, social worker, and architect of my own happiness, and my story was far from over.